See, we have like these IBS, IBD experts and whatnot, but IBS and IBD are a symptom of something that is underlying, that is leading to this. So you've been diagnosed with gut dysbiosis and you're going, what the hell is that? Gut dysbiosis is a very broad diagnosis, just like IBS and IBD. It's like, what is causing this? Gut dysbiosis is defined as a disruption of your microbiome. And when we get these diagnoses, it's most commonly probably things like this, IBS, IBD, or they'll say like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But we don't really understand like what is occurring in this situation. Where is it coming from is the biggest question. And a lot of people are not asking that because I see we have like these IBS, IBD experts and whatnot, but IBS and IBD are a symptom of something that is underlying, that is leading to this diarrhea, to this constipation, to this bloating, to this heartburn, to whatever falls under the category of IBS and IBD. So when I personally talk about gut dysbiosis, what I can be referring to is intestinal overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria, so bad bugs, it can be Candida, it can be mold colonization, it could be SIBO. So this is why it's such a broad diagnosis. And the issue with these broad diagnoses is people get treated incorrectly. It's really easy to focus on symptoms and have someone feeling better initially, but then it's that long-term game where they relapse and then we wonder why, okay, we've tried everything, why is this not working? And that's because we have to figure out where did this come from? What caused this to occur? And probably the most common cause of a gut dysbiosis would be trauma or high levels of stress. And the reason being is because one, high levels of stress are going to eat away at the gut lining. It's going to create an optimal environment for these bad organisms to thrive. It's also going to suppress the immune system, especially long term. And that immune suppression is what leads to things like Candida, mold colonization, or even things like Clostridia. So we can look at treating the gut issue itself. We can look at treating the Candida. We can look at treating the Clostridia. We can look at treating the mold. But if you haven't dealt with that underlying trauma that led to this in the first place, it might be more difficult for you to eradicate these organisms. So number one, if it came from trauma, like that's the first thing that you have to address. Now in my practice, like I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. I've had my own traumas that led to my issues, so I can like have conversations with people, but it is not my job. It is out of my scope to help people there. So this is where you want to consider things like therapy, EDMR, anything to help with that trauma, like assessing it. Because a lot of us like repress it. And once again, I'm not going to go too much in this because I'm not a psychologist, but it's that underlying trauma that hasn't been addressed, that has been proven to really contribute to this gut dysbiosis and the cause of this gut dysbiosis. So we had to put it as a pyramid of like what comes first. That's probably what would come first if you are someone who's experienced trauma. And that could even be just moving cities as a child or whichever. We all experience trauma differently. But then when we look, we also talk about things like a big one is surgeries, for example. Hospitals are riddled with Candida. So you go for surgery. Not only does the surgery itself suppress the immune system, but there's also the very high potential that you're contracting that Candida from that hospital environment. And then Candida itself will suppress the immune system even further and even act as a transporter for other bacteria like bad bugs to overgrow. And once again, destroy that mucosal lining, creating a more optimal environment for these organisms to thrive. And then when we talk about SIBO, so that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, what we're looking at is a dysfunctional ileocecal valve. Once again, is a symptom that usually can be due to low stomach acid. Okay, why did low stomach acid occur? Well, this was due to stress or something. So this is why we can see stress is usually the biggest culprit. And yes, we can focus on addressing symptoms of that using things like phosphatidylserine, theanine, ashwagandha, adaptogens, anything to help lower high levels of cortisol. But if you're still in that stressful environment, you don't want to be taking a ton of these things because then you actually could reduce your capacity to manage that stress. So, but if we're dealing with something like, you know, a really poor diet, that one is relatively easy, kind of just turn your diet around, right? This is why we have people who have ate poorly and then, you know, they just kind of start eating clean and they get some really good results. What I will say though, is if you have an underlying gut issue, it has been proven that diet alone cannot fix this. There have to be protocols put in place in order to eradicate these bugs. And then another big culprit is like moldy environments. So I work with a lot of clients in the States and they live in these humid environments, and the consistency day after day of that humidity leads to that mold colonization within their home, which when you live in there long enough, not only can you get mold colonization within the gut, but they also produce things known as mycotoxins, which is a chemical that mold produces to fight other colonies, but it can really cause immune suppression and neurological issues within inside your body. Then that leads to allowing other organisms coming in like Candida. So this is why you usually see Candida and mold together, and it's labeled as fungus. So all these fit into that diagnosis of gut dysbiosis. So when it comes to addressing it, you have to figure out which one you have first. You have to address that trauma if that is the culprit. And then it's important to understand too that this stuff takes time. And everybody has heard that speech and everybody's annoyed at that speech, but I'll give a quick reason as to why this stuff takes time. Human beings take hundreds of thousands of years to evolve, where bacteria can do it in days. So this is why there are special protocols put in place to not only prevent that bacteria from adapting, but also becoming resistant. And a big thing that people don't understand is they will implement a protocol, and some people, a good handful of people, will feel better right away within like a month or so. So then they think, okay, all right, I did it. I eradicated this, or I've succeeded in solving this gut dysbiosis. When in reality, what happens is, here's how I kind of explain it, is you threw in some antimicrobial, so some killers or some antifungals, which started attacking this organism, which then led it to hide because it wants to evade that immune system. It wants to evade these killers. So not only did they create more biofilms, which is this sticky plaque that protects it, but think of it as they also burrow deeper to avoid the immune system. So here's kind of like my analogy is, if you see a grizzly bear outside your door, you're not gonna go outside because you know it's not safe. So you're gonna wait until that grizzly bear is gone before you step outside that door.